Soldiers in the jungles of World War II slept with weapons ready, not just for the enemy, for what might come out of the darkness. Tigers in Burma, crocodiles in Pacific swamps, snakes coiled in the mud where you dig your sleeping spot. The jungle felt alive and predatory. Men wrote letters home about the fear of being dragged away while they slept. That fear was real. The threat turned out to be different. Large predators caused almost no casualties. Animals avoided combat zones. Too much noise, too many humans, constant gunfire. The thing that actually killed soldiers measured millimeters long. It came at night while they tried to sleep. It bit them and injected parasites they couldn't see. Malaria infected 60 to 65% of troops in the Pacific. In some campaigns, it hospitalized more soldiers than enemy fire did. The Army knew this. They issued pills to prevent it, nets to block it, repellent to stop it. Soldiers had protection, they just didn't use it. This is about the gap between having solutions and being able to maintain them when the heat is 100 degrees and you haven't slept in 3 days. The psychological reality in Burma and Pacific jungles was that soldiers believed the environment was trying to eat them. Stories circulated about tigers in Burma dragging men from their sleeping positions, crocodiles in swamps, venomous snakes, kraits, vipers, cobras found coiled in foxholes or sleeping areas. These weren't myths soldiers invented. Tigers did exist in Burma's jungles. Crocodiles did inhabit Pacific swamps. The snakes were everywhere. Men slept with rifles within reach. Some kept bayonets fixed. The fear was specific. You'd fall asleep exhausted after combat, and something would kill you while you were unconscious, unable to defend yourself, dragged into the jungle before you could wake up. Letters home referenced this terror. The darkness felt predatory. Then the statistics came in after the war. Large predators caused almost no combat casualties. Tigers stayed away from areas with constant gunfire and human activity. Crocodiles avoided places where hundreds of soldiers moved through daily. Snakes were dangerous if stepped on, but snake bites weren't a significant casualty category. The dramatic threats soldiers feared weren't killing them. The actual predator was the Anopheles mosquito, specifically the female. Males don't bite. Females feed on blood to develop eggs. They're most active at dusk and dawn, but they bite throughout the night. One bite can transmit malaria if the mosquito is carrying the parasite. The mosquito doesn't look dangerous. It's small, relatively quiet compared to other insects. Easy to ignore in a jungle full of louder, more visible threats. In the South Pacific Theater, malaria infected between 60 and 65% of soldiers at some point during their deployment. Some campaigns saw malaria cause more casualties than combat. Between July and September 1943 in Sicily, there were 21,482 hospital admissions for malaria compared to 17,375 battle casualties. The disease was putting more men out of action than the enemy was. General Douglas MacArthur stated it plainly in 1943. For every division facing the enemy, a second division was hospitalized with malaria and a third was convalescing from the disease. That ratio meant malaria was gutting combat effectiveness. You couldn't maintain offensive operations when 2/3 of your force was sick or recovering. The threat soldiers prepared for, tigers, crocodiles, snakes, was psychological. The threat that actually killed them was microscopic. That gap between perception and reality defined jungle warfare survival. The Army Medical Department understood tropical disease. They'd studied it. They knew malaria was the primary threat in jungle environments. They developed a comprehensive protection system and got it to frontline troops in Burma and the Pacific. Mosquito nets were standard issue, fine mesh that could be draped over a sleeping area to create a physical barrier against insects. The mesh was small enough to block mosquitoes, but still allowed some air circulation. Each soldier received one. Jungle hammocks came with integrated mosquito netting. The design kept soldiers off the ground, away from leeches and crawling insects, while the netting protected from flying insects. The hammock elevated you between trees, suspended above the mud and wet vegetation where most ground-dwelling threats lived. Atabrine tablets were issued to every soldier. The anti-malarial drug suppressed malaria symptoms if taken daily. It didn't prevent infection entirely, but it kept the parasite load low enough that soldiers could remain functional. The pills were small, easy to carry. 1 tablet per day. Simple protocol. Insect repellent was distributed. Early versions weren't as effective as modern formulas, but they provided some protection. Applied to exposed skin, the chemicals deterred mosquitoes from landing and biting. required reapplication every few hours, especially in humid conditions where sweat washed it off. DDT powder came into use starting in 1943. Soldiers could dust their uniforms and sleeping areas with the insecticide. It killed mosquitoes on contact and had residual effects. Surfaces treated with DDT remained lethal to insects for weeks. The powder was issued in small containers soldiers could carry. Later in the war, some units received permethrin-treated uniforms. The fabric itself was impregnated with insecticide. Mosquitoes landing on the clothing would be killed or repelled. This removed the need for soldiers to remember to apply repellent. The equipment existed. The supplies reached the front. In Burma and Pacific theaters, logistics chains got these items to troops despite difficult terrain and stretched supply lines. The system functioned. Soldiers had access to protection that medical experts knew would work. The problem wasn't availability, it was compliance. Soldiers didn't use the protection, not because they were stupid or reckless, because the conditions made using it feel worse than accepting the risk. Mosquito nets were unwieldy in combat zones. Setting one up required time, stringing it properly, securing the edges, creating a sealed space. In areas where enemy contact could happen at any moment, spending time on net setup felt dangerous. If you got attacked at night, the net restricted movement. You had to fight your way out of the mesh before you could respond to threats. Some soldiers tried using nets and decided the tactical disadvantage wasn't worth it. The nets also blocked airflow. In jungle humidity, often near 100% with temperatures in the 90s, sleeping under a net meant sweating through the entire rest period. You'd wake up soaked, dehydrated, sometimes more exhausted than before you lay down. The choice became, get bitten by mosquitoes or suffocate in your own sweat. Many chose bites. Atabrine had visible side effects. The drug turned skin a sallow yellow color after continuous use. Soldiers noticed this immediately. Rumors spread that the yellow skin indicated liver damage. Other rumors claimed atabrine caused impotence. Neither was true, but the rumors persisted. Men looking at their yellow-tinged hands believed something was wrong with them. The side effects were real, even if the rumors weren't. Some soldiers experienced nausea, headaches, or dizziness from daily atabrine use. When you're already dealing with heat exhaustion, dehydration, and combat stress, adding drug side effects felt unacceptable. Soldiers made calculations, guaranteed misery from pills every day versus possible malaria later. Many stopped taking the pills. Command tried to enforce atabrine discipline. Some units made it mandatory, with officers watching men swallow pills during morning formations. This worked temporarily. But in combat zones without formal formations, enforcement broke down. Soldiers would pocket pills and discard them later. Insect repellent created its own problems. The oily formula mixed with sweat, dirt, and jungle humidity to form an uncomfortable film on skin. In heat exceeding 90 degrees, any additional layer felt unbearable. The repellent attracted dirt and debris, which stuck to the oily surface. Soldiers would apply it, then wipe it off hours later because the sensation was intolerable. The repellent also had limited effectiveness. It worked for a few hours, then required reapplication. Remembering to reapply every few hours while conducting combat operations or trying to sleep wasn't realistic. Soldiers would forget or decide it wasn't worth the effort. Jungle hammocks with netting solved multiple problems: elevated sleeping, insect protection, somewhat better air circulation. But they created a tactical problem. You were hanging between trees, visible and exposed. If enemy forces attacked at night, you were suspended in the open. Getting out of a hammock quickly while disoriented from sleep was difficult. Some soldiers used them anyway. Many decided ground sleeping with its mud and insects was safer than hanging exposed. The gap between issued equipment and actual use was massive. Medical inspections would find soldiers carrying unused mosquito nets, stockpiled atabrine pills they hadn't taken, repellent bottles still sealed. They had the gear. They just couldn't maintain the discipline to use it consistently under the conditions they faced. Mosquitoes bred anywhere water collected. Rain created puddles. Combat created shell craters that filled with water. Foxholes became stagnant pools. Every depression became a mosquito nursery. Female Anopheles mosquitoes fed at night. A soldier would collapse from exhaustion and fall asleep within minutes. The mosquitoes would find him. They were attracted to carbon dioxide from breathing, body heat, and sweat. The bite itself was nearly painless. Most soldiers didn't feel it. They'd wake up with dozens of bites covering exposed skin. Each bite was a potential malaria infection. Dozens of bites per night over weeks of deployment made infection nearly inevitable. The malaria parasite had an incubation period. Soldiers bitten 1 week might not show symptoms for 10 to 14 days. The symptoms arrived suddenly. Violent chills, fever spiking above 104 degrees, weakness so profound they couldn't stand. Soldiers went from combat-ready to bedridden in 24 hours. Beyond mosquitoes, leeches were constant. They lived in mud, wet vegetation, and standing water. Soldiers would discover them hours later, sometimes dozens attached to legs, arms, torso. Removing leeches left wounds that often became infected. Mites carried scrub typhus. Soldiers brushing against plants or lying on ground would get mites on their skin. 10 to 12 days later, symptoms appeared: high fever, severe headache, rash, sometimes fatal hemorrhaging. Flies spread dysentery. Fungal infections thrived in constant moisture. Jungle rot developed between toes and armpits and groin area. The infections were itchy, painful, and spread quickly. The cumulative effect of multiple parasites and diseases weakened soldiers progressively. Men who survived combat sometimes died from disease complications weeks later. Ground in Burma and Pacific jungles was perpetually wet. Rain fell frequently. Even during dry periods, the humidity kept everything damp. Sleeping on ground meant lying in mud or on rotting vegetation. Both were breeding grounds for insects and parasites. Some soldiers tried digging shallow depressions, slightly deeper than the surrounding ground, hoping to create a drier spot. It didn't work. Water seeped into any depression. You'd wake up lying in a puddle with leeches attached to your legs. Others tried sleeping on ponchos or canvas to create a barrier between their bodies and the ground. The material provided minimal protection. Insects crawled under the edges. Leeches found gaps. The canvas trapped body heat and sweat, making sleep even more uncomfortable. Jungle hammocks worked better but created exposure problems. You were suspended between trees, visible to anyone passing through the area. If enemy forces attacked at night, you were hanging in the open. Getting out of a hammock while disoriented from sleep took several seconds, enough time to be shot while vulnerable. The heat made sleep difficult regardless of position. Temperatures rarely dropped below 80 degrees at night. Combined with near 100% humidity, the air felt thick. Breathing required effort. Soldiers would lie awake for hours sweating, trying to fall asleep despite the heat. Exhaustion eventually won. They'd collapse into unconsciousness more than actual sleep. Some units tried buddy systems. One soldier would stay awake while his partner slept, brushing insects off and watching for threats. Then they'd switch. The system meant both men got less sleep and both ended up exhausted. It also required discipline that broke down after several days of combat. Many soldiers gave up trying to create ideal sleeping conditions. They'd find any relatively flat spot, lie down with rifle in reach, and hope exhaustion carried them through to morning. Wake up covered in new bites, brush off leeches, start the next day already weakened from poor sleep and cumulative insect exposure. The sleep deprivation compounded everything. Exhausted soldiers made worse tactical decisions. They were slower to react to threats. Their discipline regarding atabrine and mosquito nets broke down further. The cycle reinforced itself. Poor sleep led to worse discipline, which led to more disease, which made sleep more difficult. The evidence was clear. Soldiers who maintained protective protocols stayed healthier. Units with high atabrine compliance had dramatically lower malaria rates. One medical study found that soldiers taking atabrine daily had malaria rates 1/10 those of soldiers who'd stopped taking it. The drug worked. It required daily discipline, but it worked. Soldiers who used mosquito nets properly got fewer bites. When done correctly, nets provided significant protection. Bite rates dropped dramatically. DDT sprayed rest areas had reduced mosquito populations. The insecticide killed adult mosquitoes and had residual effects lasting weeks. Units maintaining high compliance across all protocols had disease casualty rates 1/3 those of units with poor compliance. The difference in combat effectiveness was substantial. The problem wasn't that protection didn't work. The problem was getting exhausted men in extreme heat to maintain daily discipline with uncomfortable equipment. Merrill's Marauders in Burma illustrated the failure. Nearly all members contracted malaria. The unit eventually disintegrated not from combat losses but from disease casualties and starvation. British Chindit units in Burma faced similar breakdowns. By July 1944, one brigade with 4,000 soldiers had only 4.4% still functional. Disease had eliminated an entire brigade's combat effectiveness. The tools existed. What broke down was human capacity to maintain protective discipline under impossible conditions. Soldiers in World War II jungles prepared for dramatic threats. They armed themselves against tigers, crocodiles, snakes. They slept with weapons ready. The fear of being dragged away and eaten was real enough to shape behavior. Men stayed alert, checked surroundings before sleeping, kept rifles within reach. The killer came at night anyway. It measured millimeters long. It flew silently, landed on exposed skin and bit. The bite injected parasites invisible to human eyes, plasmodium parasites that would reproduce in the bloodstream and liver, causing fever and weakness that could last weeks. The army gave soldiers tools to prevent this: mosquito nets to block insects, atabrine tablets to suppress parasites, insect repellent to deter bites, DDT powder to kill mosquitoes in rest areas. The equipment reached frontline troops despite difficult logistics. The system worked. Soldiers had solutions. The conditions made using them nearly impossible. Not from lack of courage or intelligence, from human capacity reaching its limits under physical stress. After days of combat in 100-degree heat with 100% humidity, maintaining discipline about daily pills felt impossible. The pills turned your skin yellow and made you nauseous. Setting up mosquito nets in tactical situations created exposure risks. The nets blocked airflow in already suffocating heat. Insect repellent made your skin greasy and uncomfortable. Every protective measure required energy and discipline that exhausted soldiers didn't have. The gap between having solutions and maintaining them defined survival. Units with strong leadership and enforced compliance stayed healthier, but enforcement required command attention during combat operations. Most units couldn't sustain it. Protective discipline broke down. Disease casualties climbed. General MacArthur's statement captured the reality. For every division facing the enemy, another was hospitalized with malaria and a third was convalescing. 2/3 of combat power lost not to enemy action, but to microscopic parasites soldiers had pills to prevent. Somewhere in the Burma jungle, a soldier lies down to sleep. He's checked for snakes. His rifle is loaded. He's protected himself from threats he can see. A female Anopheles mosquito lands on his neck. The bite is painless. He doesn't wake. She feeds, then flies away. In her gut are malaria parasites. Some just entered his bloodstream. In his pack is an unused mosquito net. In his pocket are atabrine tablets he stopped taking because they turned his skin yellow. He has insect repellent he hasn't applied in days. 10 days from now, he'll wake with violent chills and fever above 104 degrees. He'll be evacuated. His war is effectively over. This was jungle warfare, not the dramatic version with tigers and enemy ambushes. The version where microscopic enemies won through attrition, where soldiers had solutions but couldn't maintain them under impossible conditions. The fear was theatrical, being eaten by predators. The death was invisible, parasites injected by insects. Soldiers prepared for the wrong threat. The army provided nets, pills, repellent. The equipment reached the front. But equipment doesn't use itself. It requires daily discipline from exhausted soldiers in extreme heat, already managing combat stress and sleep deprivation. That gap between having the right tools and maintaining discipline to use them was the jungle's victory. Not through tigers or crocodiles, through mosquitoes, through conditions that made even simple protective measures feel impossible. The predator that came at night wasn't what soldiers feared. It was what they couldn't see, couldn't shoot, and had pills to prevent but didn't take. The jungle won slowly, bite by bite, until disease casualties outnumbered combat losses. They had solutions. The jungle made using them impossible.